Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Beth Gilligan from the Coolidge Corner Theatre. We are thrilled to be presenting this special Q&A conversation with Some Kind of Heaven filmmaker Lance Oppenheim. It's going to be moderated by filmmaker and Harvard professor Robb Moss. And if you haven't seen the film already, it is playing currently in our virtual screening room at the Coolidge. You can go to coolidge.org to rent it. Anytime you rent a film from the Coolidge, it does help support our nonprofit organization. But as an added bonus, you're also going to see a really remarkable film. So thank you for tuning in today. And I will pass things off to Rob so we can get started.
Thanks, Beth. And
Thank you, Beth.
Thanks to the Coolidge, one of our most favorite movie theaters and something that we greatly appreciate. Let me get a better view here. I know all I see is the logo. There we go.
You can see Lance. My flappy hair in the wind. Hello, Rob.
How are you doing? I mean, we should say at the beginning maybe that we've known each other for the past, I don't know, 5 or 6 years or something close to that.
Something like that. I feel like when I first got to campus, I remember my first week. I attended a freshman seminar dinner that I wasn't invited to, but I just crashed it anyway because I was so excited to meet you. And then I remember sending you a bunch of emails. Didn't have you in class until maybe really formally like senior year, right? But I feel like you had been Yoda to me for far beyond that time. So anyway, I'm very grateful for you to do this today, and thank you to the Coolidge for having us.
It's a pleasure to be able to have this conversation. Quite amazing to have your film that you worked on so hard in college and made this wonderful short. And then coming out of college, you turned it into a feature. And I wanted to start with, just even at the very beginning, how did you come across this idea? What attracted you to it? And what kind of film you thought you might make when you started?
Well, those are great questions. I think I had been working on a bunch of shorts prior to making this film, and I made a film that you had seen about a man living permanently on a cruise ship for 20 years. He was a retiree. He was a passenger. He just, he chose to escape reality in his own words and live this life of mandatory fun and kind of float across the sea of where, he was kind of the master of his own universe. And I became really fascinated by it. I think in that story, it was a short, so I wasn't able to fully explore all the ideas that I wanted, that I think I still had coursing through my brain. But I was interested in this idea of how, not just Americans, but specifically that seniors are sort of isolating themselves in these sort of fantasy lands to spend their last few chapters of their lives in. And right around that time, I had seen a marketing video from the Villages. I'm from Florida originally, and I'm here right now. I'd grown up knowing about the Villages, but I saw a marketing video, and then I saw a statistic that had said the Villages had become one of the fastest growing cities in the country, not just the largest retirement community, now one of the fastest growing cities. And in this marketing video, it was called "Come Visit!" ! And it looked like, I thought it was an ironic joke of a video. I didn't actually realize that this was, at first, I just couldn't believe it. It looked like all the imagery from the Morning in America, Ronald Reagan advertisement, or even some of the openings, the opening sequence of Blue Velvet. And here was this retirement community that was designed to simulate the 1950s and 60s, and had become wildly popular, kind of the retirement mecca of the country. So I was fascinated why by that very idea of just why so many people were choosing to uproot themselves, cocoon themselves in a version of the American past that maybe never existed, and make sort of a film that could at least initially explore those ideas. I think I was fascinated by the institutions of the place when I first got there. Quickly realized that the access I would need, I would not be able to get. And I remember, I think it may have been in a class with Alfred Gazzetti, or this may have been with Ross McElwee, Rob, but I remember we had read kind of the memoir, like a 10-page memoir that Frederick Wiseman had written. It was, you know, the abridged story of his life about him being a lawyer. And I remember there was a little section, maybe I'm misremembering this, but I remember he says something about how if he didn't get the access he was sought to, you know, in the early days of pre-production of a film, if he didn't get the access he knew he needed, then he wouldn't do the movie. And I feel like I found myself at the crossroads where I knew the setting was spectacular, but the version of the film that I think I initially wanted to make just didn't seem tenable. The developers who created the place have this, you know, they're now, it's a $1 billion venture for them. It's kind of like Fort Knox. So I had to find a different angle, and that took a lot of time. And I was very, you know, grateful to you and to a lot of the folks in the film program at Harvard that I was able to, I think, convince you to let me work on it and a few different variations. But you, as you know, it was definitely you know, it was, I think, starting with the setting, riffing off of the reality of the setting, and then I think I later realized that the setting wasn't the story, and the story was something quite different.
Say a little bit more about that realization, because I think I mean, I have to share this experience with you that at the beginning it was like the place itself, but it was hard to get out of, even with access, it would be hard to get out of just the kind of shooting fish in a barrel filming style where, you know, whatever you point the camera at, it's like interesting because it's ironic.
Right.
But something had to happen to you to change that. So you saw the need to change it. And then what was that in you? What did you have to know about yourself or about the film to go forward?
Well, I mean, I think part of it was I think, like, as you're saying, that shooting fish in the barrel. I remember, like, there were different ways other professors had termed it. You know, I remember Alfred Gazzetti had said something along the lines of that it was like an endless tray of hors d'oeuvres without a main course, which I always loved. And, you know, and I think that was there was a reaction that I also was feeling, that, you know, the irresistible nature, the eye popping and dazzling stuff, the clubs, the way the place looked, and the way in which people would spend their time, was fascinating. But that didn't really form the backbone of the film. I think, like, on it, you know, it may be interesting for a few minutes, but it didn't really add up to much of anything. I think there was a need, and I think I learned this probably while it's still in school, especially after I had screened the thesis. Many conversations I had with you, I remember, same as much with Ross McElwee, and then also Lucian casting Taylor, who delivered a pretty, you know, at the time, I feel like a kind of a smackdown that I needed, I think, in some ways, of the work and I think this is also coming from, you know, maybe this is just something that I very much missed in college, but I loved the rigor of critique sessions and having my work critiqued by, you know, not just professors like yourself, but also my classmates. And I think there was this, I feel like I was listening in and I was tuning in, and it seemed like it just wasn't quite working. And I was looking at the world far too judgmentally to make something that could cut deeper and had something to say or offer, you know, an interesting kind of perspective. And then I think around the same time, after I had graduated, I was connected. I met Daniel Garber, who I really consider like a co-author of this movie, who edited the film with me. And I think he kind of, in some ways, he saw the pieces of what would later become, I think, really the rest of the film. You know, and it was with his guidance as he was editing the film, that we both were able to kind of strike this idea of, you know, this is a film that works best when it's about real people going through real problems in this very surreal place, or, you know, the people who don't really fit into the you know, they're on the margins of the fantasy and they don't fit into the marketing brochure. And by looking at the people who are on the outside, you may be able to understand a little bit more about what's going on the inside. And if we were kind of concerned with this, you know, I think maybe there was something that was also going on in my mind. I was graduating college. I didn't want to leave. I also had this kind of Peter Pan syndrome of wanting to just like hold on to something. And I think a lot of the subjects of the film had the same, you know, they also were trying to return to probably the time that I was just about to leave. So there was this element as well of dealing with a lot of existential questions of somewhat of dread, not just dread, but also of, you know, how do you figure out a life? Does that ever happen? These are questions I think I was thinking about, and I think, to my surprise, a lot of the subjects we were filming with also had similar thoughts as well. So it ended up becoming what I hoped, and I think hopefully what will be accomplished was, this isn't a film about elderly people. It's a film about people who are, have the same sorts of desires and the same sort of unrequited, kind of motivations or dreams that haven't really been met at that point in their lives, as like, that those things don't go away at any age. Yeah.
I mean, you're positing in a way that graduation is akin to mortality, and that college is a little bit like the villages. And I take your point. And I wonder also that you moved from this college life, like right away, into a kind of professional world. In college, you had all these professors giving you metaphors and forwarding you in different ways. And then you graduated into having all these producers saying whatever the hell they're saying to you and thwarting you, and helping and thwarting. And I'm wondering what that change was. Like you did something quite unusual to go from your thesis film to a really interesting feature film that showed at Sundance and is now in theatrical release. What was that like?
Well, it was funny because I think at the end of college, I still had no clue really what this film was. And I knew that there was something, special about I think I knew that there was something special about the way we were, the way we were able to tap into this idea of riffing off of how the world looked, and stylistically, kind of creating a form that could reflect the world of the place. But I didn't really know much else. And I think around that same time, I just really I needed to find a way to continue working on it, where I would be able to find the resources, the money to go and keep filming. So I felt like I was in some ways living a double life at the time, just because it was a constant, everyone back in college knew that I didn't really know what I was doing. And then everyone on the outside thought I knew what I was doing. And it was kind of a constant bamboozling of like, I would try to get a meeting with someone. And if the meeting finally happened, I just would have to pretend as much as I possibly could to know that that things were working out. But I think there was something kind of amazing in the sense that, I literally the day after graduation, we went straight back to the villages. There was no lag time. I bought my flight, and we shot for, I think, it was like about a month and a half. And I think that shoot was really the shoot that changed everything. And I remember actually showing a cut to you right after I think we had done that shoot. And I remember you had said that it felt like quite a different film, or there was a different approach, that was something was happening that maybe it wasn't fully working yet, but it was much different than what I was doing in college. So I do think there was a level of like, I feel like I was absorbing so much thoughts, so many notes, so many ways to think about what wasn't working, and that finally I just, after graduating, it was like, I wanted to go back, and I wanted to hit the ground running, and I'm grateful that I had the ability to do that.
One of it's wonderful to hear these stories. I'm catching up with you at the same time, which is really great. That the film has a very strongly felt visual style, directorial intent, the relationship of the stories of the characters embedded in the backstory, what used to be the front story, but the backstory of the villages themselves. It's, and I agree that some of this is editing, the relative weight of things, but you have a very particular style, and seeing your other work as well, that sort of you're developing it is like showing up. And this is, in a way, the most accomplished example, and also the first feature in which you've had to sustain something over feature length. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your directorial style, what you've come to understand about it, or what that is, because it's very strong in the film. It's extremely, like, anybody who watches this film goes, that's somebody with a particular idea of the world and how the world looks, and how it's put together.
Well, thank you. I think it comes from this place of I love films that are thoughtful about that are thoughtful about stylistically reflecting the subject matter, or kind of deriving the style from the subject, right? And in this case, the subject in was so rich. It looked like a Busby Berkeley musical or something, and I wanted to find a way where we could pay particular attention and kind of celebrate, inhabit the fantasy, kind of take the marketing images, the marketing videos, the brochures, look at all of those images, study them, and then kind of know where to put our camera and know what, almost, know what to do a little differently, but see those images and examples and then kind of continue on with them. And I think to me, the importance of this film, I don't think you could just make a fly on the wall verite documentary in a place like the Villages. I think it's a place that already distorts reality as soon as you go in. It's a bubble. And I wanted the film to kind of be its own bubble as well in that sense. I wanted the film to be able to, kind of inhabit a place that's in between both reality and fiction. It's not, I wouldn't say anything in the film is scripted, everything is real to the subject's experiences, but the way in which we crafted the film, and I think it took a long time to figure out the balance of how to do this right, really was a pretty collaborative effort in the end. It was an effort of figuring out what was actually happening in our subjects' lives, seeing what they would feel comfortable in letting us shoot, and then kind of in a way directing them, kind of getting a performance out of them as they played themselves. And there was a world in some ways, I feel like, and we've talked a lot about this, Rob, in the past, about working with subjects and what happens when subjects are not, in the past I've had experiences where some subjects are very much not happy with the films I've made about them. I feel like I would only want to do this process again in a way, because I felt like by inviting the subjects into the process, they knew more or less exactly what we were doing. When they saw the film, they weren't surprised. I think they were surprised by, like, kind of the as you were saying, the relative weight of certain things, and like how we shot so much material and they loved the material that was in the film. But the surprise to me is that I think, Anne and Reggie and Barbara and Dennis, they all see the film as sort of as a reflection of their own sensibilities. I don't think they consider themselves artists, but they do think that they collaborated on a work. So it's interesting to me that something so personal to these folks' lives and something that's so deep and at times really dark, they're able to stand by it and be very proud of it. I think it comes from the way in which we were shooting it. But I think, again, stylistically, it's always, to me, if I find a subject, I find a setting, I want to make sure that everything that I'm doing behind the camera, every choice I'm making with, whoever I'm working with is, and in this case, it was, my cinematographer, David Bullen, who I've been working with since I was like very young, who's one of my best friends. And, the movie would not be this, it would not look good without David, because I can't do what he does. But I think a lot of it is really looking and being thoughtful about how we can take a subject and really think critically about how we can reflect that in the filmmaking style and how to translate it as an experience.
I don't know whether this is possible, what I'm about to suggest, but I'll try. You have an example of something that you directed from their lives, but that you directed and asked them to do, that really worked in the piece in the ways that you describe? And can you describe something in which you had the same idea, but it was somehow over the line and that you tried and it didn't work? I'm looking where the line is. Looking where the line is.
That's a good, I'd say. So one sequence, the Anne and Reggie at their marital counseling, that was something that that they were doing, when the cameras weren't rolling. And obviously it's a lot to ask someone, hey, can I film you at therapy? I mean, it's not something that I think a lot of people would be interested in doing. So it took a lot of time. It took a lot of talking with them about how we would do it. I think Reggie was always sort of on board, but again, I think a lot of the challenges, as well as Reggie was going through what he was going through, there was a lot of times where I wanted to make sure he was very engaged with the film and always wanted to be a part of the film. Whereas Anne, it took a lot of convincing to begin with, to get her to be comfortable around us. So I wanted to shoot like the sequence like that from both of their perspectives, but it needed to take it took a little bit of work, and we only are shooting with one camera. So, that sequence, I would say, is directed in the sense that, what we the approach was, we let the conversation kind of run normally, And then we would kind of be resting on, I think there's like a 2-shot of the two of them, and they're looking at the marital counselor. And then there were times where I would miss something, and then I would have the marital counselor kind of rephrase it, or no, I'd kind of ask a question, kind of almost like a form of dynamic interviewing, where I'd hear something and then I would just try to get someone to rephrase it, and then the conversation would hopefully continue again naturally. And then, what I would do afterwards, after like all of the raw emotional, experience that would have happened hopefully without me having been there. So in this case, after Anne and Reggie's session actually ended, I then, we then kind of turned our camera onto the marital counselor, and I had him basically, I prompted him to say the same questions that he was saying to them off camera before. So this way, I just knew I was able to build a sequence out of it. And, in my mind, I didn't see anything. Maybe there are some in the documentary Orthodoxy that would say this is wrong, or, and maybe it is wrong. I don't know. But I do think, to me, I think the times where it felt over the line were times where we were asking people, to consider doing things that they would not normally do. And that gets you in a realm of that just doesn't work. I think that ends up bringing the film too much into the realm of fiction, and then also I think the thing that I wanted to pay very close attention to, given that every subject in this film really was so bold and brave, and also very just giving with their time, and how much of themselves they gave to this process. I didn't want to make a film that they would see and not feel represented by, or make a film that they didn't like. So, I think there were times where I would ask, like, I remember there was a sequence, this is like a very tiny example, but, Reggie, I was like, Reggie, what if, like things seem to be better. Why don't you do Anne's laundry for her or something? Do you do that normally? And he's like, no, I don't. And I was like, well, maybe, what do you think? Would you do it ever? And he's like, no. And I was like, okay, then no, I guess we won't do it. But, there were times where we would play with stuff like that, and it never felt right. And I think that, the riffing off of reality, so to speak, has its limits for what works and what doesn't. As long as it's rooted in some sort of truth that happens when I'm not there, then I feel comfortable kind of doing everything I can to build a sequence out of it, and knowing that they know what the lens of the production is and how I'm going to kind of capture it in the edit. But otherwise, I think, and I think you had seen in earlier cuts where I was experimenting with different, more fictional versions of stuff that just wasn't quite working or believable.
Yeah. I'm guessing about this, but I would imagine with Anne that for her to let you shoot her, she had to feel you were also interested in her and not just as an appendage to Reggie.
Yes.
Or that you're somehow aligned with Reggie's agenda. That she needed to feel, because she says so in the film, that I need to be heard, I need to be respected, I need to be, listened to, and that she fights for that over the course of the film, to not just be, steamrolled by him. But you had to know her, and I think she makes a huge difference in the film. Without her, she's like kind of every person in the film.
Yeah.
She's so genuine and, guileless in a way, and in a way that you just appreciate, and that it.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think you're totally right. I mean, I feel like there are many people. The thing I love, I mean, first off, Anne is like one of the sharpest people I know, and she's not only is she like, it's funny because she never wanted to, she's always, I think initially she was very not into the idea of being in the film, and I think in the end she was. It's amazing to me that she sees the film as sort of as what it is, and is able to. She's Reggie and Anne have like gone to the movie theater before COVID, and then they've gone to a drive-in, and now they upgraded their home theater so they could watch the movie like 5 more times. So I'm just like, wow, it's kind of amazing to me. But no, but I think the thing about Anne that I always found so interesting was that she could be sort of a stand-in for in some ways for I don't want to generalize an entire population of people is not right to do, but in some ways she does have the sort of interest that like maybe a more typical villager would fit the profile of. She's very active, she plays pickleball, she's very good at pickleball. She doesn't really like to talk about her anything outside of the kind of realm of what most sort of social dynamics of these clubs and activities kind of lend to. It's sort of like you're there, you're doing your duty by being a part of something larger than you, and then you kind of go home to a life that, maybe more private. But I think you're totally right. And it was a balance that was tricky at times. I think, to get Anne on board with the film, it took a lot of meals and it took a lot of time off camera without, sometimes there would be days where I would just have, like my crew of four, including my sister, who's, a producer, and David, the cinematographer, our sound guy, and Christian Vasquez, who was, in the film program with me. But there were days where we would just kind of go without cameras and just hang out with Anne and have a meal with her. And I think that kind of process, allowing ourselves to be, giving ourselves and letting ourselves open up to her, I think in turn allowed her to open up to us. And then I think the other component to this too, when the first interview frame where you see them sitting on the bed next to each other, they hadn't really spoken. I think like they really existed on very different schedules. They had different bedrooms. They, Reggie would go out sort of in the nighttime and would, go to sleep when he would be going out. They were really on different cycles. And I think, I don't know if, anyone had sort of sat them down on the edge of a bed or on a couch or something and asked them to talk about themselves and how they feel about each other. And what do you think of Reggie's spiritual practices? Reggie, what do you think of Anne's practices? And I think these are things that they both had sort of internalized and had ideas about, but they hadn't really said to each other in a long time. So there was a weird, I'm probably like the least qualified person in the world to ever do this, but there was, I think just the line of inquiry was almost a little bit like probably how a therapist would ask questions. And I think in turn that it sort of opened things up a little bit. And I think, obviously when things got pretty dark, we were really with Anne and we were supportive, and I was there when I think a lot of people in her life weren't and didn't know what was going on. So I think that was a big part of, that relationship as well.
Is there anything in the film at this point that either still makes you feel ethically uncomfortable or that reminded you of something where that line was complicated? Just because I think that
that's a good question.
So many of the problems in the film, yet, where is that for you? How do you think about those issues?
It's interesting. I think, the only place I would say I feel any sort of, queasiness or something is in, the Richard Schwartz character who subject, who is kind of giving a lens to the history of the villages. I feel like it's a thing that I was always surprised we were able to get away with in the film, where we were able to kind of give a quick segue into the history of the villages. Here's sort of an authority figure who was there when it was, who had a hand in a lot of things. But he's the only person who's sort of shorthanded in that we don't really follow him a whole lot more. And he's only there to really serve as a mouthpiece. I think the images I never really considered to be like, I love the images of him in the pool, but I could also imagine why someone may find that to be unflattering. And I think that was a question that we were figuring out in the edit of, we don't want to, I really wanted to go, I think this is to quote Lucian here again, but I remember he told me in an earlier version of this film that the easiest thing a filmmaker can do is to make someone appear foolish. So I really wanted to, like, that was, I think, something I had in my mind a whole lot, just, and I think in earlier versions, the line was crossed far too often where we were going into the territory of the tightrope act felt a little bit closer on the mockery side. And I really wanted to dial that back. And I think that's something that Daniel, and I think also was reflective in the shooting going on. But that sequence, I think, is the only one that really that has that quality. I think the things, Dennis was a tricky subject to follow for a variety of reasons. But I think with him, I think that one of the biggest reasons was, how to sort of interact with the women he was speaking with. And I think, what we ultimately ended up doing, I'm happy that we did do, was sort of give, the women who he speaks with, the women at the pool, the woman at the bowling alley. Nancy and him had a previous relationship, so it was a little bit of a different story. She knew who he was. But every time that we were filming one of those sequences, I really wanted to make sure that like no one ever felt like they had that, because there was a camera on them, you know, they had to sort of like that the camera was reflective of what Dennis's desires were, in the sense like I didn't want someone to say, yes, come into my house, because they were being filmed or something like that. So there were many times that was a tricky balance to strike, of how to have that conversation. I obviously didn't want to corrupt the like, you know, tell someone something that would make them say something or do something to Dennis that wouldn't have happened normally. But I wanted to make people aware. I wanted to make these women aware that this was, you know, do you know this guy? Do you know his reputation? And I'd say both women knew who he was and still were sort of, you know, happy to engage with him in a more flirtatious way, but obviously turning him down as well. But no, I mean, you know, other than that, I think I do think a lot of the things that you think you're referring to, in my mind, you know, we really tried very diligently to question every single scene, every single choice. The people who watch this film, are they going to be unhappy with this? Are we misrepresenting someone? Are we making them appear silly, or is the film being too judgmental? I think these were questions that constantly that we were, you know, battling with, and I don't think I would have been able to make something that I felt as good about without Daniel, honestly, Daniel Garber.
Yeah. I think that I agree that pulling the characters forward, not just filming the place, gave you much more room to focus on the stuff that's interesting about people. And I agree that it's ultimately, these are like love stories for people seeking love in this environment. The environment's very particular and totally fascinating, and very well represented. And, you know, even near the beginning, you have that sound montage of the kind of Kool-Aid, people who've drunk the Kool-Aid of the villages, speaking about the villages. But that's not what the film ultimately is. It just gets rid of that. It's like once you say it, you've dispensed with it. I love later how Dennis, in his most cynical way, you know, refers to how much fun it is to be in God's waiting room while he's trying to get off the phone with his like 2,000-year-old mother. It's like amazing. And I wonder if we can come back a little bit, and we'll probably need to wrap up reasonably soon, but not quite yet. I want to come back a little bit to your directing and to the shooting. There's something, you know, about the way the precision of the camera placement, often shooting long shots, so that you've got the sound, you know, from a distance, but you're seeing it from a distance. So people are often placed within their environment. So you're seeing the environment and the characters within the environment. There's something highly set up about those shots. It is the kind of the opposite of an observational film. It's some other kind of film. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that, and maybe even the relationship with your DP about, you know, how do we shoot a scene like this? What's interesting about it? You have some good rapport with this person, but, you know, speak to that.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, David, the cinematographer, David Bolin, and I feel like we have developed a shorthand in some ways while working on stuff, just because we've made a few films together at this point. But I do think the best asset of David is that he isn't just someone who's a technical, you know, maverick. He's someone who I think thinks, you know, he has the heart and the eye and of a documentarian. You know, he could direct a movie himself, and it would be a great movie. In the sense, in my mind, he cares so much more about subjects and making sure that we are, you know, that like he cares more about the subjects' lives, I feel like, than the art that we are trying to create out of their lives, or their suffering for that matter too. So I think I think being so plugged into everyone's lives is a big part of that. I do think, though, that, you know, there were things that we were experimenting with that we hadn't really done before. I think in the earlier, you know, the first few trips, the first 2 trips we were there, I really wanted to embrace this idea, at least something that could kind of give people perspective into the way we were looking at the world, which from my perspective was like, this is like an alien landscape with all of these things that are so unfamiliar to me. And, I wanted to sort of capture the world in a very wide way, see everything, see how it's manicured, see the landscape, even the opening sequence, try to, like the idea of like, can we live inside of a marketing video, and then can we pop out of it to see the people who, are on the, the cutting room floor, so to speak, of if this was how the Villages was presenting things. But then there were other things we as the shoots went on, we knew we had, if the movie was going to be something that was more interior and reflective of the, kind of a more of a psychodrama or something along those lines, even melodrama in some places. We, obviously you have to be closer to your subjects, conceptually, but also I literally, we had to do that. I think, there were many moments where the camera is like, like 2 feet away from a subject's face when Anne and her friend Archie are talking about Reggie and his and what was going on there. That was another example of a conversation that they would, he was one of the only friends that Anne would really kind of open up to about all these things. Archie was previously in another life a therapist, so I was like, oh my god, bingo, this guy is going to be perfect. And I think they had gotten so engrossed in that conversation that we were, they kind of, which is insane to me, we were able to put the camera so close up to their faces that they, in some ways, I'm not sure if it was the artifice of doing that and the feeling of being filmed that bled into the work somehow, but it seemed like the more we kind of lent into the artifice, like the more real things sometimes would get, more emotionally raw. And that was a completely surprising thing to me after so long of experimenting with ways of how to do it. And there were other things we were eventually, experiment with, like the servo zoom, these zooms. I think you get a lot of it with Dennis, and you get a lot, I think you have the last shot of the film as well. But I think when you're in the Dennis, we call it like Dennis cam, because it was like the eyes of a predator or something. He was the eyes of desire. And there are other sequences as well with some of the clubs where we wanted to kind of have this, like, how do we make this feel like a nature documentary or something like that? Is there a way where we can present, we were looking at again some of the Busby Berkeley movies and things of that nature, where we were like, oh, how can we capture the cyclical nature of how this, people in sync? How can we follow and capture that and reflect it and mimic it in some way? And then the last shot of the film where you have Barbara dancing in the crowd, which is, she was dancing on her own, but that was a shot that we tried that shot like 30 times. I mean, it was like, we literally went through like 2 hours of song and dance just to get that one shot just right. By the end, Barbara was like, I hate you guys. You made me dance the entire night. She's like, I wanted to go out for like 5 songs, and I had to apologize profusely. But I do think there was something there as well where, we showed her the shot afterwards, and it was, I think she totally got it. It was this idea that, I mean, I feel like a few ways that we, that I was looking at it, but this idea that, here, there is a sort of subtle kind of thing that I think we were trying to say with the film and the world of the film, that, it's a bittersweet idea, but the more you can kind of join the collective flock and probably like subsume a part of yourself to become a part of this collective fantasy, probably the better you will feel in some ways, and I think, for as I think horribly just problematic so many parts of the Villages are, I think, the racial homogeneity of it, the political, nature of it. I do think the design of it makes sense in some ways, that this is a place that is, the more you can become a part of a group dynamic, the more you can kind of join a collective unit and maybe dull parts of your own personality to fit in with a group of people, just as you would in college or in high school, and you're trying to fit in with the jocks, even if you're not, the more, I didn't find solace in that in high school. I feel like I was like lightly bullied for trying to play lacrosse when I was a really bad athlete. But I do think there was something powerful about trying to join something bigger than you. And I think there is that shot at the end that when you're, finally we're kind of starting on you're starting on Barbara much closer, and you're finally able to kind of get the whole breadth of the community in that one sort of last bow. I felt like kind of, captured hopefully what we were able to try and say with the film.
Yeah. I mean, there's tons more to talk about here. I'm just getting going, but I think maybe we're near the end. Is there anything else you want to add for your hometown, or not exactly hometown, but adopted hometown audience?
Adopted hometown. No, I mean, you know, the movie would not exist, and I know you're gonna say that I'm just blowing smoke, Rob, but it would not exist without you. Seriously, you know, whether it was in class, allowing me to work on it in class, and then, you know, letting us borrow your eyes after I graduated and watch a few of these cuts. You know, I'm very grateful that that you exist and that you are as generous of a person with your time. And you know, thank you. And thank you to the Coolidge Theater for so many cinematic experiences that somehow I'm sure came into inspiring some things in this film.
Yeah, and thanks to the Coolidge, and Lance, thanks so much, and thanks for the work and continuing to do it. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you too. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.